Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Newton's Tree Unfiltered AI Leadership Series. I'm Harry Shuaib, founder and CEO of Newton's Tree. By background, a medical physicist, I've spent much of my career inside the health system working on AI deployment and evaluation. And in this series, we speak with leaders who are actually responsible for AI deployment in healthcare and not just talking about it. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Ainsley MacLean. She is co-general partner at Ainsley Capital, a practicing Harvard-trained neuroradiologist, and was, until recently, Kaiser Permanente's first chief AI officer. Many of you will know Ainsley from her time at Kaiser Permanente, where she was, I think, one of the world's first chief AI officers and oversaw perhaps some of the largest deployments of clinical AI in healthcare. She now advises health system startups and investors on healthcare AI strategy. Ainsley, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Harris. It's so great to be here.
Fantastic. Ainsley, like I mentioned, you've been involved in healthcare AI for quite a long time now,
Mhm.
through its many phases. We're now several years into this latest phase of AI enthusiasm. From your perspective, I'd love to hear what's actually delivered value inside the health system, and what's mostly been hype.
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I love the importance of pausing and just reflecting. I feel like in AI, we have to do that almost every quarter, just to
Yeah.
say, where have we come? I would say the largest gains have really been those that have allowed the ecosystem as a whole to welcome AI. We know that it's such a loaded term across many sectors. And so, one of the most important things is for a workforce at whole to feel not threatened by it as a technology and to lean in and help guide its implementation. Because if ultimately we are fearful of a new technology, it's not going to be successful. So, one of the applications that really led to, I think, the pretty widespread adoption was, of course, the ambient scribe technology, which we've kind of talked about for a while. And I think that made, like ChatGPT, AI technology in the medical setting just very touchable, very understandable,
Mm.
very relatable. And therefore, it empowered physicians to be users of a new technology and to kind of speak about it in a way that matters. Obviously, coming from the lens of a radiologist, I used generative AI in my practice years before even ChatGPT kind of came to the forefront through reporting AI. And so I think, again, just having technology that's easily tangible, that's visible, and that makes your day better is going to therefore lead to wider spread adoption. I think, Harris, to your point, where are the areas where it struggles? I think in general, the more complex applications of agentic AI, where it's hard to sometimes fully understand a multi-step complex process, as is unique to almost every aspect of care delivery. And it's a little bit harder to see. And it's a little bit more threatening to the workforce because there's this understanding that there may be some replacement of a task that I'm doing. And so I think the key, therefore, in this next phase of application of agentic AI is making sure that our teams understand that what we're trying to replace are the things that maybe aren't the most rewarding aspects of your day, and that can improve patient care, can improve the physician, nurse, care team, just day to day practice in medicine.
Yeah, well, that's super interesting. The follow-up question I was going to ask was about what surprised you the most about what's worked. And I think the thing that you said earlier around ambient scribes really taking off has been an obvious example of what's worked. But I guess drilling down into it in detail, what about it, aside from I guess, the tangibility of the technology, has made it so successful in terms of getting adoption?
I think the AI scribe really benefits from having the same traits that just ChatGPT or another, um, any other platform, Claude, whatever it is, benefits from, which is this concept of the generative AI piece and sort of seeing words come to light in front of your eyes. And when you look at physicians, really actually almost any professional occupation, a lot of what we're doing is writing, documenting. And so I think that the ambient scribe technology and companies sort of benefited from that magic,
Mm,
where you're seeing that generation, and you're seeing it play out on a patient by patient basis. Um, I think they also were well done. And I'm thinking of the top maybe 3 or 4 AI scribe companies had very strong physician or data science leaders who were very personable and seemed to really understand healthcare. And I think that that was a win. I think it was also a sign of just how challenged healthcare was as a whole coming out of COVID, how broken the
Mm,
system was, how burnout doctors felt. And so feeling as if there was something that truly added a little bit of ease to the day, which it did. So I think it was the way that the technology is used, but also the true return on investment that was felt and measured. I think it did raise a high bar for a lot of other applications, but it also set the standard and it also paved the way for a lot of the companies that I work with in terms of, making, I think, doctors, executives, believers in the value of this technology.
yes. Yeah. No, I completely agree. The other thing that has been an interesting change compared to historical trends is that hospitals have been really good adopters, relatively speaking, of this kind of technology of ambient scribes. Um, what have they gotten right this time? And yeah, let's just start with that. What have hospitals gotten right with adoption of AI scribes?
Well, it's interesting. One of the allegories we always talk about at Ainsley Advisory Group is sort of the allegory of the electronic health record
Mm,
deployment in the United States and how that was something that objectively was very successful from an adoption standpoint. But it was regulated and it was mandated. And although it obviously raised the bar of quality of documentation, because we know that when you, as a patient, have everything in one place, it's going to be just light years different from that doctor who's, writing their charts until 8 at night in their back office that no one else sees. But at the same time, it felt very much top down. I think
mm,
that with the AI scribe, in many ways, it felt almost like a movement where it was led by physicians. I think it also, one of the things I enjoyed seeing during my tenure at Kaiser Permanente was this shift from these very large incumbent technology companies dominating the healthcare landscape. And of course, all of them at one time were also smaller companies, right? But it had gotten to the point where, you're thinking about, well, how do we standardize our technology stack? How do we simplify? And I think we still always want to be thinking strategically along those lines. But then when you bring in this new technology, these new applications, the brightest minds in the world working on hundreds of new companies, it's hard to just kind of put your head in the sand and not welcome that in. So I think it was certainly an opportunity for us as an entire ecosystem to look to these newer entrants to the healthcare technology market and see what they're bringing to the table. I think the other thing though we want to be mindful of is, and you know this, Harris, because you've been, building Newton's Tree for a long time, a lot of the companies that I see do well time and time again, and this is not a uniform thing, many of
mm.
the earlier entrants had been around a lot longer than the rest of everyone was talking about AI. Right. So I feel like the sweet spots like 2016, 2017, 2018 is when these companies were being born. And therefore, the amount of data that they had to then build off of to perfect their product, they were in some ways, just a handful of years ahead of the rest of the market. Um, and I think that that's the same for teams as well. And there's been some, I've seen some work sort of published on this recently that it looks like actually the more experienced teams who've sort of been in healthcare longer are the ones that are successful. And I think early on when a lot of these LLMs came out, I encountered several companies that were sort of just fresh to the market. And I think there's an opportunity for that for sure. But they're not the companies that I'm seeing emerging now as survivors and as deeply penetrating the market.
Yeah. No, it's a really interesting point. It reminds me of a conversation I had with a previous guest around whether the sort of West Coast startup VC model works in healthcare, which is in some ways an old-fashioned industry, but has loads of idiosyncrasies and the deep heritage that you have to sort of respect and understand, and you need to have a bit of some staying power in order to be successful. Um, uh, Flipping it to the other side, and really focusing on hospitals, I guess, Ainsley, if you could put it bluntly, what are hospitals getting wrong about AI adoption today?
The main, I think, challenge that I see is not having a global strategy or having your strategy involve sort of point implementations of AI. I think that was okay in probably early 2025. I don't think that's okay in 2026. I think you're going to, like all technology, when it's applied in fragmented ways, can be very expensive. Um, I think that it's much better to deploy one or two solutions broadly well, measure the deployment, reap the, tremendous savings that you can have from that.
Mm,
And then to share that, shout it from the rooftops with other systems who maybe don't have that ability to lean in right now, but who could really benefit from that. And so I think that, first of all, the biggest mistake you can make would be to not go with not use artificial intelligence. I think that's a mistake. I think we moved beyond that. Again, that was more
yeah,
of like a 2025. I think I think that you want to be really careful the companies you work with. I think sometimes one of the things I see is like, oh, I'm friends with so and so, I'm friends with this person. There's this little startup I want to work with. That's fine. And the little engine that could become, the future, fix to your system. But I think that no matter what, the team has to be very seasoned that you're working with, because the implications of failure in healthcare are expensive and potentially, ripe with fraud or other challenges that could lead to really bad outcomes for a health system. So I think, lean in, pick a tech, pick the right company with the right group of advisors, with the right, deep expertise, with the right leadership team, and then deploy them at scale and measure outcome. And maybe do that for, 2 to 3 at most problems within your organization.
yeah. I think those are critical lessons, and particularly early stage. I always say that you're not really investing in the tech; you're investing in the people. And it's
Yep.
like, do you believe that these people can get the job done? Because the reality is, no matter how shiny the tech is, it's always going to be messy business, healthcare,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And you want people who have similar values, who have expertise and that same pedigree, so that they can be reliable at the end of the day.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah.
one of the
Well
questions
said.
that yeah, one of the questions that keeps coming up for us, obviously, is around governance and AI. And some organizations have been um, quite visionary in setting up, office of the chief AI officer, and or others are putting AI under the CIO or the CMIO or sometimes the data or analytics team. I guess initially, from your perspective, who should ultimately be responsible for the AI agenda in a health system?
I would say the CEO.
Ah,
So I would say that at this point, artificial intelligence it's more than a technology, right? We know that. It needs to be owned. It's funny, and I appreciate, Harris, that you said I was one of the first CAOs in healthcare. And now I feel like it's gotten to the point where it's truly, and it always has been a technology, but it's truly technology. Um, it doesn't really matter if your CTO or your CIO has that deep understanding of AI, which we all need. It needs to be overseen by the highest tech person, but ultimately the strategy needs to be driven by the CEO. And one of the things I love to talk about is the trifecta of the CEO, the chief financial officer, and the chief information or technology officer. And I think really, if you put those three people together, maybe throw in someone who's doing research, you're going to get this unstoppable ability to transform an organization. And the reason I say CEO is you need the leader at the top who understands the biggest problems and the biggest opportunities to drive the agenda forward, with the expectation that almost everything should have artificial intelligence intertwined in it from a business standpoint.
yeah, I completely. If that really that last point that makes it the CEO's business, I think for us when we started. this journey, particularly because I come from an imaging background like yourself. We started, I guess, working with radiology departments, and then we had sort of the advent of LLMs and ChatGPT and everything else, and then we sort of broke out of that sort of little
Yes.
silo,
Hmm.
and increasingly the person who's making the buying decision for an AI governance and orchestration platform is the CEO, and it's because
Yep.
those CEOs recognize that, hey, AI is going to be a part of every aspect of my business.
Yep.
And I need to be involved in setting the agenda and the tone of what we are going to be looking like as a health system going forward, right?
Interesting. Yep.
And I think those CEOs understand what's ahead of us, basically on the horizon, but that actually we can have real radical transformation of how we deliver our healthcare services. Same way of going from analog to digital, that sort of
Hmm.
night day switch. I really think something like that could happen. Um, and so, do you think that I love that sort of trifecta model that you described? Is AI then causing us to break down the traditional silos that we've had in hospital leadership? It is often very common to have, not great collaboration between the CIO and the CFO and everyone
Hmm.
else with their own sort of agendas. Is AI sort of disrupting that model?
I do think that AI is fundamentally a unifier of the direction of every company.
Mm,
And so I think to your point around silos, if you also just look at the basic way that each of us is using AI in the running of our businesses, for instance,
mm,
right? I mean, and you look at how we're spending our day and our multiple, increases in efficiency. The type of work, I think, of everyone in the C-suite, my guess is changed and how they're
mm,
spending their day. And so we can use some of that time and energy. I'm not saying there's less work, because in some ways it feels like there's almost more work. But in some ways we can use that extra bandwidth that has been freed up from the remedial by
mm,
AI to work together towards longer strategic priorities that are delivering returns, whether it's for shareholders, whether it's to our people, becoming more efficient. So a startup across any stage should be able to operate with one quarter the number of people. But then I would argue, do we then have four times as many startups? Because then we're able to do so much more and see so much more potential and cure so much more disease with different things. So I'm like a definite major advocate for um AI providing an opportunity for humans doing more advanced work
mm.
more advanced work that we're capable of. And so, a lot of times early on, I don't know if you remember this, Harris, there was sort of this talk of a concern that generative AI would kind of dumb us all down,
Yeah.
right? Because we're all spouting the same stuff. Um, I think that dumbing down is one way to look at it, but I like to look at it as it's actually elevating us, because the things we were spending time with before maybe weren't the best use of human brain, whereas being creative, thinking big, like a lot
Mm,
of startups are thinking big. Like it's no
yes.
longer, I want one healthcare system. I want an enterprise system. I want this. I want to unify the private practice outpatient setting with the, payer setting. And so I'm seeing CEOs, like yourself, thinking bigger in terms of how their go to market strategy is, but with less people. So it's kind of like this
Yes.
paradox.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it really enables a certain kind of multidisciplinarity as well,
Yep.
because as a single person, you can actually do a broad range of activities. Like you say, you can interact with your go-to-market strategy, your tech and your product work, and everything else in between. And I always say that one of the challenges we've always had with innovating in healthcare is that you've got lots of very different actors and entities,
Hmm.
sort of in this sort of like deadlock, right? You've got, frontline healthcare professionals, you've got payers, you've got old fashioned tech companies, OEMs, etc. Whereas you can have this sort of new breed of company that kind of understands it all and can be a digital health app and an insurance plan and this and that. And so m- models of businesses that probably would have been too difficult to build
Yep.
now become conceivable because the capital requirements are lower because AI is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. I think that's going to be really interesting. Um,
I like that.
One thing I wanted to call out was at the end of last year, Black Book Research published a study about how 1 in 5 healthcare AI, hospital AI pilots never reach enterprise deployments. So there's quite a lot of failures. 4 out of 5 pilots that basically don't go anywhere. Um, why do you think so many AI pilots fail?
I think that it's honestly a good thing that they fail.
Mm,
I think the problem though is that we don't always have the insights that we should into why they fail. And we don't always internalize the learnings from them.
mm,
So I think that we want to reduce the barrier to entry of piloting. And I think, but we also then want to reduce the expense of piloting, and the sort of time period in which we realize something has failed. I do think, though, to your point of why do things fail, sometimes I think in hospitals, we move way too slowly.
mm.
So oftentimes technology takes so long to adopt or deploy or scale. There's now a better tech that's come along. And I think we need to be really careful with that in AI, especially, because there probably is something new. I think sometimes we don't think horizontally enough. Like we'll just sort of, like going back to the earlier question, we'll think a little bit too focused into this one problem and try to solve it. I don't think we can afford to do that anymore with AI. We need to have this higher level viewpoint of how AI is deploying. And it should be done in a thoughtful, quick way where you're learning quickly and it's not a tremendous expense. Um, but I think the concept of failure, and you've been doing this a long time, is really something that we need to embrace in all technology and not see it that way. And sometimes I push back on CFOs who don't necessarily like to see that, and I get that. But I almost think we need to budget for pilot failures, and that's maybe not done well enough.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, we've both led sort of AI teams in big health systems, and I don't know about you, but I caught myself in lots of situations where you're trying to be the change maker. You're trying to sort of advocate for an innovation or technology, and a lot of time you're pushing and pulling. You're using your own political capital to get something in, and you create scenarios where things can get sort of too big to fail. Where you're like,
Yep.
okay,
Yep.
well, I've put in so much effort to get this thing in, it kind of now has to work. And I always felt like that's not a great situation to be in
Yep.
and as any business, right? In
Yep.
any business, you want things to succeed or die on their merit. And that's where your point around the cost of piloting actually is the important denominator here, right? And I always use the example of like iPhone apps, how, everybody has their favorite navigation app, whether it's Google Maps or Apple Maps or Waze or whatever it is. But nobody's an expert in navigation. So how did you like come to know them so intimately? It's because it's free to try them. You just download it. It's so easy. You use it. You don't
Mhm.
like it. You delete it. You get a better one. You use that, and then hey presto, you now know what works for you. And one of the things that I always wanted to do with through Newton's tree is how do we create that effect with healthcare innovation where there is no penalty in innovating, right? Or deleting something or not liking it, right? Because like you
Yep.
say, that's what we should be doing. We should be failing. It can't punish us when we fail. It needs
Yep.
to be a lesson learned so that the next time we do a pilot, we do even better and we get closer to the final solution.
I totally agree. And it goes back to our earlier conversation of the success of the AI scribe. Because
Mm,
when you look at the deployment, it doesn't matter which vendor you use, they all were able to get that out to like 1,000 physicians in one
mm,
day, just like an app on your phone. Right.
yes.
And it's interesting. Some of the AI products for radiology. I'm thinking of some of the stroke products, for instance.
Mm,
They've probably had wider adoption than maybe, they even should, because of their necessity, but also, they can be downloaded immediately to your computer. Neurologists are walking around with them, ER doctors are walking around with them, right? So you're watching this AI, and the reality is, I've used it. It's extremely helpful when you're reading a bunch of cases and all of a sudden you see there's a large vessel occlusion and it's like a big letter on your screen, and that's the difference of tissue for this patient. So I think, having a problem that needs to be solved, and solving it in a way that, like you said, you can see it quickly. Like if you could get Newton's tree on everyone's, every executive's Apple or iPhone, I think probably they would understand right away and love it, right?
Yes.
So, but yeah, no, I love that. I think the other thing is that, some early companies that I've worked with have had tremendous acceptance and adoption because they have access to data.
Mm,
And they're looking to solve. I was thinking back to your silo question. One of the silos that I still see, and I started out, I remember when I founded Ainsley Advisory Group, I naively was like, the life sciences space, like, is going to really blend quickly with digital healthcare. And when I was at JP Morgan earlier this year, it's just like this huge life science group, and they're just seems so separate and siloed
yeah.
still, and I think that's okay for now. I don't see that as being long term because ultimately everything they're doing, they want to downstream prolong patients' lives, cure cancer, treat chronic disease, etc. So somehow there needs to be something where we come together. The regulatory implications of that whole group of companies is just so significant, and but it's also a lot of it's institutional siloing as well, so I don't know your thoughts around that. I would love to see that broken down a little more. Med device I'm seeing as being more open to things, and I think it's partly because of physical AI, and maybe we all see that coming, and those are used by physicians a lot of times, right? So that's like sort of just a couple of the silos.
Do you see that those silos existing because of technical barriers or organizational or business model or a bit of everything? Like what's the key thing that needs solving, particularly for pharma and life sciences,
Mhm.
to be able to do what they need to do with health system data?
I don't know if I have the answer to that one, Harris. I think it's and maybe there's a value in having that be siloed. But I do think, it's interesting. I think the category that is going to break that down
Mm,
is going to be this wellness and longevity category. I
mm,
think that category, and now it's one of these things where we're always looking off to the side. Oh, it's over here. But the reality is that when you look at the promise of AI, people expect our children to be living to 115. Maybe not my children, your children probably, but not my, but like living to 115. So I think at the end of the day, it's going to be working towards longevity that is going to drive some of that early biomarker and
mm.
pharma. I think it's going to make us all talk. I think the clinical trial space is at that intersection, and we're seeing a lot of AI application there. And I think also the ability of AI to provide more feedback to patients. I'm thinking of a great company that I work with that provides patient input around your clinical trial, which is like, we weren't doing that before. It was done on
Yeah,
a piece of paper. And
yeah,
now it's just you're looking at your app and you're getting feedback on how you're feeling. You're giving feedback on how you're feeling on this drug. I mean, imagine what that's doing for pharma, right? So then that's digital and pharma together. So I think with more of those examples, some of these silos will get broken down.
yeah, 100%. Yeah, I essentially is as more of the patient record becomes patient held almost.
Yep.
It
Yep.
helps sort of decentralize it a little bit and break it out of those walls. The other thing as well, we realize, is particularly for AI companies, just like pharma companies, is the cost of evidence generation that really weighs down the
Yes.
whole sort of health economy, right? And it's very well known for drugs and pharmaceuticals, the cost of evidence generation going through the trials, but they have revenue protection on the other end, right? They
Right.
can patent a drug and then generate revenue for a decade or two afterwards. Digital health and AI companies do not have that luxury, right? There's
Right.
almost no revenue protections for them. And so the cost of evidence generation becomes really punishing. And so what we realized was, look, hey, the Newton Street platform sits inside the hospitals and it's integrated into the EHR and all these other systems. And normally we're deploying third party products to orchestrate and govern them inside a hospital. But what if we deployed them just to test the model? So it's
Yep.
not to be used, but to help the company prove that it works, sort of part of their evidence generation. And because our platform is already in there, it makes it cheaper to test it. And so one of the things that we're hoping for is, can we break down that silo, at least for AI companies, so that they
Mhm.
can generate evidence, get FDA approval much quicker in a much more leaner fashion, and then make more viable businesses in the long term.
I think that's tremendously important, and especially because what you're doing is providing real world data.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of what's being done from a regulatory standpoint, or even just when you look at um, how the FDA is just, I would say, leading in terms of being an AI first, division within the government. And I thought of it sort of around the patient data silos, how CMS is also moving us towards this concept of a future in which patients should have access to their data. And that the onus is on us to provide value-based care. And there's a lot of things people don't like right now in terms of, reductions in reimbursement, et cetera. But fundamentally, there's an expectation that, you know, um, people should be rewarded for making patients healthier, not for just, you know, diagnosing them and treating them with disease after disease. So there's this move towards wellness, which fundamentally, and the wellness industry is booming, right? But
Yeah.
fundamentally, AI has the ability to, and companies like Newton's Tree that can then evaluate and test quickly, it has the ability to get us to a state of mass wellness faster, which is so much cheaper for the organization. The key is to make sure we're aligning incentives so that the
Yes.
companies that do well are making people healthier. And I'm just impressed by how that seems to be a common theme of the digital health tech companies, which I find so refreshing and more in line with sort of the environments in which I was trained and kind of grew up, where it's like you're really thinking about, like, how do we have patients live longer, healthier lives? And hospitals aren't always aligned to want that, even though the people there want that. And so AI that can make patients healthier, but also help hospitals, with their bottom line are key. I think to your point, when you talk about digital health companies don't have those large margins of a pharma company, talk about a group that really has no margins, it's the hospitals.
Yeah.
Right? And so
Yes.
it's like, so when you're looking at pilot failure and pressure, most hospital systems are operating almost like on an annual to annual basis of, like, how am I going to just meet my budget for the year, in the setting of cutting costs, et cetera. So I think it's made us all roll up our sleeves a little bit more and move forward, but it's certainly not easy, and there's not an easy problem to solve.
No, you're right, and you're right as well that that culture and attitude has been a recent change, and I think for a lot of developed health economies and systems, the writing's sort of been on the wall for a while that these are not financially sustainable as they are now. Like the way we've been doing healthcare for the last 3 or 4 decades, no one can afford for it to continue, right? Like the public can't pay for it, the patient can't pay for it. And I think some of those new entrants sort of know that from the beginning, and
Yep.
so they're much more open to radically different models. Um, I wanted to talk a little bit about how health systems partner with some of these new entrants and AI vendors. Whether it's like big systems like Kaiser, but it feels like almost every health system now has a ventures arm as well.
Mhm.
I want to hear from your perspective, when you're evaluating AI vendors to deeply partner with, where you're doing some code development and or deeper collaboration, what signals actually matter when making those decisions?
So there's a few, and I think that you did mention the venture arms of these hospitals, and I think, you know, people have sort of different thoughts on that. I think it's terrific in the sense that, you're bringing together sort of the best and brightest across an ecosystem, which is what you want. I think we also, though, have to be careful that we continue to always be objective in how we deploy tech and what tech we deploy. So there may be companies that healthcare systems invest in that maybe aren't the right company for their hospital system. So we don't want to ever cloud that. And I think healthcare systems do a good job of aligning that. But I think that's sort of a kind of a trend that we see, right? Like it was something where there's this clear barrier that's always been put up about pharma, right? We don't want
Mm,
the doctor writing our pharma script to be flying on a private jet paid for by that pharma company. So, at the end of the day, I think you just have to be really careful in that regard. Um, you know, I think that at the end of the day, we're going to be moving much towards a coordinated, kind of thoughtful approach to the deployment of AI because the amount of companies, and I don't know, Harris, I should try to get some data on this. I feel objectively the overall number of companies has decreased that are sort of these newer entrants you're talking about. I think that one of the common themes for those that get these great health system partners is a savvy leadership team, the
mm,
right advisors, the right sponsors. Hey, not only
mm,
are you an advisor, I think getting in the door a little bit on the earlier side, helped. But at the same time, I think in 2026, people are kind of picking up their head and looking around. I think you want to be referenceable. So, one system you deploy in who happens to be like maybe a landmark healthcare system in the US, you want them
mm,
to love you. At the same time, people kind of want to do their own thing. So, that may not work. But I think certainly thinking around cost and understanding that getting your foot in the door, sometimes reducing that cost can reduce the barrier to entry. Having said that, I think that, having a really solid data science team and the consumer, the purchaser needs to have zero doubt as to the ability of the team to deliver.
mm,
Um, I think certainly understanding, and we're seeing this in the companies we're working with, like the having a very high level of certification from just a deep understanding of cybersecurity concerns, even having, where the data is stored is key. But I think fundamentally it's having the right backers as well. We talked a little bit about venture capital or family offices and like having those people who can open doors, but who also are aligned and aren't putting too much pressure on the team. I think there's a lot of pressure, to really grow, 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 sometimes at the expense of just doing something well. I had the opportunity to be a fellow with the First Christie Ventures Collective, and our last conversation kind of centered around that. And I think it was one of the big things I took away was this concept that when you look at the greatest companies of time over time, what
mm,
has been their unifying feature? It's been a relentless pursuit of a single objective over time, like
mm,
never varying from that. It was definitely never a focus on growth. Like if you look at the best companies, never like, I'm going to grow, right? So staying true to your mission, staying true to your vision, and being the best in that, I think will get to you. And if you look at the best founders, like yourself, they've been in this 9, 10, 12 years. They're just getting started, right? So kind of like a seasoned executive at a large incumbent technology company.
yeah, no, those are great lessons. Yeah, having the pedigree, the right advisors, people to sponsor you. Um, I'd love to learn about the flip side, which is when you've had like a very impressive demo. What are some telltale signs that this is not going to go well if you were to use it in real life deployment? Do you have some stories like that?
I do. I think that solving a problem that doesn't really exist, which it seems like that should be obvious at this point, not understanding your target audience and also not being loved by a customer.
Mm,
So I think you need to think about like it's not unique to any other product. You need to have a customer or ideally a group of customers who's like your biggest fan. And I always say to companies, it could be one small independent practice in the middle of Michigan. And that's like your fan club. And then they're going to show up at society meetings. They're going to talk about you and they're going to be willing to publish with you and have a case study with you. And, they're going to help you amplify and grow and be better. I think that that's really key because if you don't have a customer that loves you and that you're delighting, then I'm not really sure. And that was, I think, part of the flaw early on in, radiology AI, which,
Mm.
you and I have been involved in for a while. I mean, if you look at and still some of the language about radiologists, it's just like, well, for now, radiologists are purchasing your product. So I'd suggest you not say anything that's going to potentially alienate them. And they're reasonable and they want their day to be better and they want tech that makes quality better, but it has to be sold by the right person. I can tell you, Harris, I've been on some calls with some arrogant founders that just um, did not resonate with the audience. And I could see it even if they resonate with me, they were off-putting to someone. You have to really know what you're talking about. Because if you have a specialist on the call who's practicing this day in and day out, say like a dermatologist or a cardiologist, and you're touting something that's not really in line with like their day-to-day work, I think it can be really really hard. And you have to understand the incentives of people,
Mm.
and what's driving them and what's driving their business growth.
Mm.
And
Uh,
so, yeah.
just on that last point, Ainsley, just to tease out a little bit more, how do you balance the point that you're making around respecting the expertise of the person on the other side, whilst also coming across as someone who's confident and has the answer as well? Because a lot of times people are taking that call because they might need some help. So how do you strike that balance?
Well, I like to think about sort of the difference between being smart and having wisdom.
Mm.
And I don't think wisdom correlates with age or the amount of years you've walked on the planet. So when I was saying the like founders have been in this 8 to 10 years, I don't mean they've necessarily been building their company for 8 to 10 years. I mean, they've been thinking about a problem they've wanted to solve in healthcare. They have a personal story. They have someone in their life. I would say a common theme of the founders that I've seen be successful, someone in their life has been impacted by something in the healthcare system, and it's been their single mission for, the last few years. Um, what was the first question what was the question you asked, Harris? Because I got a little bit on a side note there.
The question I asked was about how do you strike the balance between
Ah, yeah,
respecting the
yeah,
expertise of the other person whilst also being the expert that they're going to pay money for.
right. I think it, again, that goes back to sort of this wisdom piece.
Yeah.
And I think people underestimate how important it is to know what you don't know.
Mm.
Because everyone respects that. And I try not to come across as pretending I know things when I don't. And for instance, if I'm talking to you about something that's sort of deeply analytical in the radiology space, in even governance of hospitals, from you're coming at it, let me understand Harris's perspective, let me understand mine, and therefore, what are you bringing to the table, and what am I bringing to the table? I think simple things, one of the things I work with the companies on when they're doing pitches to C-suite is just like understanding your audience, referring to people in the polite way. Like, for instance, I probably would call a doctor in front of a room of people. And like I've had several folks who like just didn't even recognize that I was a physician. And like that's a big problem. That is not most of the companies I'm working with. They've done incredible diligence on the companies that they're speaking to. But these are things that like, when you're going quickly and you're trying to grow at the expense of quality, you may overlook. And so one of the things we work with our companies on is like, I would much prefer to prepare for a pitch for 3 months with you than to go, to get materials than to go into that pitch sort of unprepared. Because you usually don't get a second chance. I don't know if you agree with that. Like, I guess I would ask you in your experience, because you can also come up against it can be really hard, especially virtually, to pitch. And sometimes you can have people that are like distracted or they're not giving you the time of day. And so, you have to kind of get their respect quickly.
Yeah, yeah. I don't love virtual pitches at all. I like healthcare is a team sport and it's a person business. And like you said earlier, one of the key signals is like, can I trust these people? And it's
Yep.
hard to do that over a call.
Yes.
And also some of the subtle things you mentioned about politeness and decorum and things like that, and body language. it's much easier to make a mistake virtually around those kinds of things, and you only get one chance to make a first impression. Um,
100%.
so it's always a
100%.
challenge. I wanted to go back to some of the radiology points. Uh, Even today, I think 80% of FDA-approved AI tools are in radiology. And the radiology has been ahead of the game when it comes to, I was going to say AI, but actually technology in general. Before the EHR existed, we had the PAC system. The PAC system has existed since the 90s, right?
Right.
And so radiology has been digital for decades, right?
Yep.
And some people are still faxing handwritten notes. What lessons do you think radiology offers the rest of healthcare when it comes to AI adoption?
Ooh, so many. I think this concept of a marketplace is an interesting one. I think that there's a lot of lessons, and now we're talking about pixel-based AI products, not
Yeah,
reporting. So,
yeah.
image interpretation AI. I think cost and like how you structure cost and just having point solutions and like the minimal usefulness of point solutions. So like as a product having the ability to provide more of a horizontal solution where you can diagnose multiple things. Now, of course, a lot of that is just a function of the technology, right? So the technology has come so far, even in just the last year, so that
Mm,
we're seeing this ability. I think that certainly the regulatory process within the United States has held us back in certain regards. And it pains me to say that. I think that's changing. But if you look at the application, for instance, internationally of just normal versus abnormal chest x-ray, the United States normal chest x-rays should not need to be previewed for the first time by a radiologist. They should be interpreted by AI, sent to a different stack. And the radiologist should be able to sign off on that with very high confidence that that's a normal and then focus their day on other things. Now, as a radiologist myself, I love a good normal x-ray because it, relaxes my brain. But at the same time, there's too many studies to read, not a lot of radiologists, like it's easy fix here. So,
yes.
I think we'll get there. I think it will be a large system that's going to have to take that on and just set the standard within the United States that normal chest x-rays read by AI. I think we're going then to, well, how do we get to normal mammograms read by AI? So then we're
Mm,
now taking off large volumes of studies and then we can start working on the other stuff. Whereas I think radiology started with like, how do I diagnose a fracture? How do I diagnose a head bleed? Okay, so that's fine. But there's a lot of other things to interpret on an abnormal head than a head bleed. So, but that has a lot of value as well, right? In terms of triaging studies. So, I think that the platforms within radiology, the disparate nature of it. So you have this PACS where you're interpreting the image. You have your dictation system, right? And then you have the AI algorithms. So somehow that all is going to come together. We don't know how this story is going to end. We don't know who the players are going to be that are going to merge. I have my theories, but that needs to be something that's not the radiologist problem because they don't have time because they're very busy right now reading a lot of studies. So somehow that has to happen without the radiologists. I always think of like every radiologist I talk to is like, all I want is an AI tool that will accurately measure changes in sizes of lymph nodes in complex cancer patients so that I can make an overall assessment and like, okay, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think there's a good product out there doing that, which just speaks to the complexity of what a radiologist is doing every day. Um, so, I don't know. I have so many. I'd be curious your thoughts on radiology, Harris.
Yeah, no, you're completely right, and I made some of those same mistakes in my research career. So I spent 9 years of my life trying to improve prognosis of glioblastoma patients, and
Hmm.
which is a wicked hard problem, right? And after 9 years, didn't make a dent in the problem. When in reality, like you said, if we just focused on ruling out normal X-rays, then we would have made such a massive impact. Not even just on those patients who get to go home or be
Yep.
discharged quicker, but everyone else in the system where it's gummed up because we've got a bunch of normals in the way.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so I completely agree. It took me a while to recognize that, and actually, and it's partly because you have a lot of the scientists or physicists like myself who are very interested in those, rare diseases, the niche problem, the finding the aha moment, when actually that's not what we need, right? What we need is to get rid of the big workload and the safe stuff, the stuff that is less
Hmm.
risky, both for the patient and the provider. It's also interesting, though, to counter what you said about how relaxing a normal X-ray can be. I remember having a conversation with a radiology colleague in England, and he very rightly said, he said, working at the top of your license is exhausting. Everyone talks
Yes.
about, like, AI will
Yes.
take care of the drudgery. You work at the top of your license, but that's like
Yes.
it's like being a driver and you're always on an F1 track, and you're like, this is
Yes.
exhausting. I can't always be racing. Like, I need a nice
Yes.
highway or a country lane to drive on. Like, I can't be in an F1 track every time.
Yeah,
Uh,
totally.
yeah.
Now, question for you. If you, so I agree. And one of the things I've kind of thought about is like, well, what if, and this is where incentives need to change. What if you were driving on that F1 track, but you only had to do that an hour a day? And so
Yes.
the rest
Yes.
of the day, whereas before you were driving maybe on like 95 from New Jersey to Florida, like all day, but now
Yeah.
you're driving on that F1, maybe 2 hours a day. And then the rest of the day you're doing other things, like ideally, I mean, this is what this generation wants, right? This new generation graduating,
Yeah.
they're expecting to have quick returns. And I don't want to generalize, but also they're an AI native generation. And so
Mm,
they are very efficient. You look at these kids right now, they're so fast with what they do and they're asking great questions, which is like, why am I learning this right now? I can have this do this for me. I'm going to solve like world's greatest problems, right? So, but yeah, I completely agree. And as a neuroradiologist, if I'm on a rotation where I'm reading all complex neuro studies,
mm,
it can be it's a lot on your brain. But if we have the tech that can rule out normal head CTs and normal MRIs, I also feel really good because there is some mental exhaustion with looking at a normal. Yes, I can determine it's a normal within, 1 minute for a brain MRI, but I'm always a little worried.
mm.
Is there something there? So if I know I think it's normal, AI says it's normal, I'm feeling pretty good. Let's move on
Yeah.
from that. And if you look at, I'm not a malpractice attorney, obviously, but if you look at the things that haunt people, it's not usually that complex case where a lymph node went from 2 millimeters to 4 millimeters. It's that, for some reason you're just off that day, you missed that lung cancer. We need to avoid that, not only from malpractice, but just from a patient care standpoint. I don't
Yeah.
know the answers though. I just remember I was on a panel once and someone said, what if someday you're reading pathology studies and you're reading cardiology studies and you're a radiologist? And I started getting very bristly about this. And I realized, you know what? There's probably going to be an imager of the future and they're probably going to be doing everything. And it's probably going to be like the coolest job ever. And med school is so competitive right now. So competitive. I don't know. We need a lot more doctors, but at the end of the day, I think what they're doing is going to change and the right people are lined up to help fix that. And I have the luxury of talking to people at the top academic institutions within top venture capital, and people are partnering. And how do we bring, like, I think of even MIT, every single department at MIT has some sort of partnership with the data science department right now.
Mm.
Right. And I just love that model. It's all going to come together. So, and then how do we make sure that we're graduating doctors who have a deep background in business, in data science, in kind of the trifecta we talked about, right? Like that's the doctor of the future. So, I'm excited about it, but lots of unknowns, and I'm sure there's a lot smarter, like 5-year-olds out there who are just gonna be running around running circles around all of us.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting times. I was actually in Vienna last Thursday, Friday, giving a
Wow.
talk on multimodal AI at the European
Wow.
Congress of Radiology and what that means for the radiology profession.
Wow.
And the thing that I mentioned was, like, radiology as a profession is born out of an invention, right? Wilhelm Röntgen invented the X-ray,
Yep.
and poof, a medical specialty was born, and that can happen again, right? And is AI
Yep.
that? And like you described, where you have the person who is doing the radiologist's job and something in cardiology and in derm and something else, something like a super diagnostician. It sounds insane, but I'm sure radiology sounded insane before the X-ray was invented, right? The idea that you could
Yeah,
see inside bodies and there'd be these people who were dedicated to this task of interpreting shadows of radiation. So yeah, stranger things
absolutely.
have happened. Yeah.
Absolutely. And things we do in radiology seem insane now. I mean, we used to do upper GI studies with barium, and now
Yeah.
it's like, why are we doing that? Right.
Yeah.
And no, 100%. And I think also, going back to a focus that I have now, Harris, which is sort of on this outpatient space and expanding access to care really for rural communities. I know we talk about that as well. I mean, what does the doctor who goes out to a home
Mm.
look like in 40 years? And it's not going to be going out to home visit to like take their blood pressure, right? I mean, we're going to have all machines doing that. It's going to be going out and performing surgery in the home. It's going to be go out and doing something, right? I mean, it's like we're getting there. And it seems kind of creepy, but at the same time, like at some point that could be more cost effective than a hospital system.
Oh yeah.
Or for certain surgeries, you have to go to an ASC. For others, we can set up a little thing. And I mean, just whatever it may be. And so that's kind of what we're driving for. But fundamentally, we have to connect all of these people. We have to connect. We have to rethink how we train people. We have to rethink who's in healthcare is important to the care we administer, and kind of elevate that across every part of the country.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I always joke that, I spent most of my career at St. Thomas's Hospital, which is right opposite Big
Uh-huh,
Ben, and it's a
uh-huh.
1,000-year-old institution. And there's no way the future of medicine involves, Victorian era buildings. There's going to be a radical decentralization of the hospital where
Yep,
it's hospital-like care, but it's not
yep.
happening in this sort of big ugly building. And then I guess looking a bit to the future, since we're coming to time, the first wave of AI in healthcare, was really focused on diagnostics and documentation. The next wave seems to be actually much more operational. Scheduling agents, care coordination tools, revenue cycle management. In terms of all these emerging AI use cases, maybe in the rural setting or maybe otherwise, what are you most interested in right now?
I'm really interested in seeing more widespread use of AI across all of the really unglamorous
Mm,
aspects of healthcare. So I think there's still opportunities to get widespread traction in revenue cycle, working with a great company sort of in the compliance and fraud space. I think fundamentally, though, I'm most excited about physical AI in healthcare and the ability for us to augment the incredible work of physicians and staff with more physical components. I think healthcare is led in that through robotics. But we need to do it in a cost-effective way. We can't drive up
mm.
costs. The system can't take more costs. So, and physical AI is really challenging. It's very expensive. So, but we're going to see that change right over the next few years. So, I'm excited about. I think like fundamentally the healthcare ecosystem coming closer together, more cohesive, saving dollars for everyone who pays a cost when they pay their healthcare insurance premium, and getting better outcomes for patients and having them live longer, healthier, and AI being done safely. I mean, we haven't talked about safety. I tend to be much more like the bullish person about AI. I don't tend to talk about safety. um I think it should be implicit. It should be implicit, but I think that to your point, like x-rays can damage people. It can cause cancer, right? But it didn't hold us back from having it transform healthcare. So we have to approach AI with the same sort of thoughtful, seasoned approach, I think.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Ainsley, before we wrap up, I've got one very quick question and the final one. What advice would you give to hospital leaders who are trying to build a responsible and effective AI strategy today?
I would say that think high level. So we're at the point now where you really should be interacting with a vendor. Um, I would say through almost like a third party where you're thinking about the ability to monitor multiple AI tools across your organization. And there's a few out there, including, Newton's Tree, among others. But I don't think that you should be spending 90% of your energy on monitoring AI. That should be done by a partner in conjunction with you. And so I think companies work with a company that's thinking big picture,
Mm,
not small point solution.
amazing. Ainsley, thank you so much for sharing your insights and experience today. I think the perspective that your portfolio career has given you has been incredibly valuable. Thank you to everyone for watching. If you found this conversation helpful, please like, share, subscribe, and we look forward to seeing you on the next Newton Street AI leadership interview. Thanks, everyone.